Good evening, everyone. It's a real honor to be here today for the Glaucoma Australia live Q&A and to give you all a research update on vitamin B3 and glaucoma. I'm Dr. Flora Hui, and I'm a research fellow. I'm an optometrist and a researcher at the Centre for Eye Research Australia, as well as the University of Melbourne. And I want to begin today by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm seeing you all tonight, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. And I want to extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who might be here online today. So we're going to start off with just a little bit of an introduction around glaucoma and around the research that I'm doing in vitamin B3, and then we'll move across to the questions. So we believe that over 300,000 Australians actually suffer from glaucoma. And around the world, we think there's actually over 80 million people who currently have the condition. And the main way that we treat glaucoma, as most of you already know, is by lowering eye pressure. And so no matter whether it's using eye drops, whether it's using laser or surgery, it's all targeted at lowering eye pressure. And we used to think that high eye pressure was the reason that we got glaucoma. But now we know that's not necessarily true. Whilst eye pressure and high eye pressure is a really important risk factor for glaucoma, we know that you can still get glaucoma if you have lower pressure as well. And we also know that about a third of patients actually continue to progress and lose vision despite treatment to lower their eye pressure. So we know there must be something else that's going on that's contributing to their glaucoma. And we know that's true because, for example, aging is the biggest risk factor for glaucoma. As we get older, the likelihood and the risk of developing glaucoma does go up. It also has a genetic component, especially if a direct family member has glaucoma, then you also have an increased risk of developing it in your lifetime. But we also have research evidence to show that perhaps the eye is actually not getting the blood flow that it needs to sustain itself, or that it's not actually getting the energy that it needs as well for the cells to keep working properly and allowing you to see. And that's actually what I'm going to focus on tonight. And that's around how the retina, which is the nerve cells that line the tissue that lines the back of the eye, and how it consumes energy in the eye. So we know that the retina actually has a huge amount of energy consumption, and it's actually similar to the brain by weight. Now, the nerve cells, which are the ones that we lose in glaucoma, actually use a lot of energy, and that's because it has a really crucial job of sending messages from the eye to the brain where we process vision at the back of the head. And it consumes a lot of energy and is dependent on mitochondria to make it. Now, mitochondria essentially act as batteries for our nerve cells. But we also now know that mitochondria can actually become impaired early on in glaucoma, meaning that if our nerve cells aren't getting enough energy to work properly, they can actually become injured over time, and then we can lose them, which can then cause vision loss. So how does this all fit in with nicotinamide, which is a type of vitamin B3? So here's a really complicated diagram, but all we really need to look at is down at the bottom in the light green, that all these processes are important in order to create energy in mitochondria. And what we found is that there is a really important factor in helping produce energy. And that's in the blue, called NAD, which is short for nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. NAD is actually a key factor for all of our living cells and is crucial in helping produce energy in mitochondria. But we also know that NAD levels do go down in the eye with age. Importantly, though, is that we know that nicotinamide actually helps recycle NAD in our nerve cells. And we also now know that people who have glaucoma actually have reduced levels of nicotinamide in their blood serum. So the first studies actually looked at, can we actually boost NAD levels in order to support energy production in our nerve cells by simply giving nicotinamide? And so in the lab-based study, the answer was definitely yes. It was very, very robustly protective in glaucoma models in the lab. And so here at the Centre for Eye Research Australia, we wanted to look at, well, what about in humans? Can it actually provide any protection to people who do have glaucoma and who are already being treated for pressure lowering, with pressure lowering treatments? And the great thing about nicotinamide is that it's widely available. It's already available on the market and it's quite affordable. And because it's been used for over 70 years and also in higher doses as well, we have a pretty good idea around its safety profile. And so we did the first clinical trial in glaucoma. And we wanted to ask the question, can we detect a change in people who already have glaucoma? And so we did a study where people took took nicotinamide for 12 weeks as well as placebo. And these two graphs are basically to show that on the left here at 12 weeks, when people were taking nicotinamide, they actually showed improvements in how their nerve cells were working. And they also had people improving on their visual field test as well compared to placebo. So about a quarter of people actually improved in as short as 12 weeks. But we all know that glaucoma is a chronic condition. So we need to understand what's happening in the long run. People tend to lose vision slowly in glaucoma. And that leads us to the vitamin B3 in glaucoma study, which is what Glaucoma Australia has really generously supported us on. And this is a 2-year double masked study, meaning that neither I nor the participants know what they're taking. And they're either assigned to take placebo or nicotinamide. And the question is, can nicotinamide slow down vision loss over 2 years? And 2 years is chosen because we need to look at how our visual field changes over this time period, and this can change slowly over time. And this is actually part of a big international collaboration with teams in Singapore, in Sweden, and in the UK. And together, we're working together to determine if nicotinamide should actually be used in standard glaucoma care. So if you want more details around the trial that we're doing here in Australia, then there's a QR code on the screen as well, and that will take you to learn a bit more about our trial and about participation in the trial as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stop here and I'm going to go to the questions and hopefully give you some more answers. And so I'm just going to remove the slides from the stream now. Okay. Alrighty, so here we go. So I've got the first question here was, has the study trialed any other dose of vitamin B3? And is there anything closer to the dose currently recommended on the vitamin B3 bottle? So the answer is we haven't actually currently trialed any other doses of nicotinamide. So the dose that we have here is derived originally from the previous studies, the preclinical studies, to show that it had an effect in the preclinical studies. And we took that to the humans. And we chose this dose because we thought that if we were going to find a difference, then we're most likely to find it at this dose rather than something lower. And we're not going to go any higher because people can experience more side effects with such higher doses. But saying that, if we do have a positive result from this trial, then it does definitely open up the question of, can you achieve the same effect with a slightly lower dose of nicotinamide, for example? So that is definitely research that we'll be looking into in the future. So another question, this is from Paul. Is all vitamin B3 equal? For example, firstly, does it matter if it's niacin, no flash niacin, or niacinamide? That's a great question, Paul, and it's really important because despite the fact that everything's been labeled as vitamin B3, they are not all the same, and they're actually used very differently throughout the human body. So niacin is what most people actually think of when they think of vitamin B3, but it actually is very, very different to nicotinamide. Niacinamide is actually the same as nicotinamide, very confusing, but they are actually the same compound, whereas niacin is actually very different. And niacin does not really contribute to energy production. So yes, you're right, they are different. And with regards to the research around glaucoma, it's been all around nicotinamide only. So the next question I have is, can vitamin B3 be taken by any age group? And the answer is, for our glaucoma studies, we are recruiting adult participants. There has been previous research done before using nicotinamide in a diabetes study, which did involve children, but at slightly different doses. And also with nicotinamide, it's not recommended to be taken by women who are pregnant or breastfeeding at the time. The next question I have is around, will manufacturers change the recommended dose of vitamin B3 for those with glaucoma and mention that on their packaging? So currently, we have the commercially available bottles of vitamin B3 for sale, and on their recommended dose I do believe it says 1 tablet a day. And so that is not particularly around for a therapeutic dose for a specific condition. And typically with supplements, they don't really write recommendations around for certain conditions how much you should be taking. And that's because it's a supplement. So obviously currently nicotinamide is being marketed around skin health. And the reason for that is because there was a big study that came out in Australia around skin cancer and around prevention of skin cancer. And that study found that in people who had a history of skin cancer, taking nicotinamide at higher doses could actually prevent the recurrence of non-melanoma type skin cancers. And so because of that, it does have a skin health marketing on the actual bottles. But even then, it doesn't recommend the dose for skin cancer for this condition, but rather it just says for skin health. So it's unlikely that manufacturers will actually change the writing to recommend the dosage for a specific condition. So the next question I have is, are there plans for other supplements to go under clinical trials that may be beneficial for glaucoma or eye health? And that's another great question, because obviously aside from our current treatments, they're all targeting at lowering eye pressure, but we do know there are a lot of other things that are contributing to developing glaucoma or developing other eye conditions. And so there actually have been some clinical trials that have been going on, looking at other different kinds of compounds or treatments. For example, citicoline or coenzyme Q10. There have been small scale studies. And so there hasn't been anything as large as what we're trying to do right now with nicotinamide. And part of the reason is because these kind of clinical trials are quite hard to do and can be quite expensive to do as well. And so whilst there have been a lot of lab-based studies and there have been smaller clinical trials looking at these other kinds of treatments, there haven't been huge large-scale trials. Despite that, there have been some evidence that it is useful, for example, ginkgo as well. And so some ophthalmologists do actually recommend it to their patients as well, because it actually might be helpful, for example, in boosting blood flow to the back of the eye to help the nerve cells receive the nutrients that they need to function properly. But we don't actually have any much bigger trials because of the difficulty around them. And so this nicotinamide trial that we're doing now, that's also why we're doing a much bigger collaboration with groups around the world as well, because we recognize that we need to come together and collaborate in order to really answer the question about whether nicotinamide should be incorporated into standard glaucoma care and whether it can actually prevent vision loss. So the next question is there any specific time of day that vitamin B3 should be taken? So we don't have a specific time of day, although in our trial we do recommend in the morning and in the evening, and that's partly due to the half-life of the drug. So nicotinamide obviously doesn't just stay in the body, it gets excreted. And so because of that, we do split in our trial, we are splitting it into 2 doses, so in the morning and evening, to try and make sure that there actually is a certain level of nicotinamide in the body at any given time. So we do split it across the day, but not a specific time. And the next question I do have is, should vitamin B3 be taken with or without food? And this actually is an important question because it should be taken with food, definitely. It can naturally be a little bit acidic for the stomach, and that can actually lead to the most common side effect of taking high dose nicotinamide, which is a tummy upset, which is an upset stomach. And a lot of the times that can be helped by actually having it with food. So if you do take nicotinamide, it is important to do have that with food. And that kind of answers the next question, which was around, is there evidence of B3 causing stomach upset? And so in our first study, we actually it was the most common side effect. About 8% of people did report having a stomach upset when they took the higher dose. But a lot of the time, this was no different to when groups were taking placebo or when they were taking nicotinamide. So we couldn't actually really determine at the time whether there was a real effect in that first study. But at the same time, we did ask each group, no matter which tablets they were taking, to do take it with food to try and reduce the chance of a stomach upset occurring. So the next question I've got is, when will all eye specialists start recommending vitamin B3 for glaucoma patients? My ophthalmologist doesn't believe in the benefits of supplements to eye health, but my friend's ophthalmologist recommends it. That's a really good question. And a lot of the time, at the moment, we are currently still doing our long-term clinical trial. And I do believe that that will really provide the evidence that will actually help convince our medical professionals as to whether we should be incorporating it into standard glaucoma care. At this point in time, we've had our study that we did here at the Centre for Eye Research Australia, but also another study that came out of the US where they used nicotinamide and pyruvate and also found a positive result there. And now a lot of other groups, now we are all, looking at its long-term benefits. And that's a really important thing because in glaucoma, obviously, as you know, it is a long-term condition. And so we want to know that, okay, there's some positive results in the short term, but now convince me what happens in the long term. Is it actually going to be beneficial for our patients in the long run? And so when we do finish this trial, and actually look at our data together across the different countries, I do believe we'll be able to answer the question of whether nicotinamide actually has benefit in reducing the chance of vision loss and whether we should be recommending it. And so it is certainly true that some eye health professionals are more likely to recommend a supplement versus others, and that's partly due to the fact that we haven't had really big clinical trials around supplements, whereas the one that we're doing now will hopefully answer this question. So the next question I have is, what kind of food groups have vitamin B3? So you can actually get nicotinamide in the diet. So it is available in, for example, fish, poultry, brown rice, nuts, seeds, red meat, but it is only available in low doses. So it does mean that you don't actually get the amount of nicotinamide that you would need for it to reach what we call therapeutic levels in glaucoma. And that's why you actually have to take it as a supplement rather than just consuming it in food. It is also important to note that, however, with glaucoma and as with a lot of other eye conditions, eating a well-balanced diet is actually really beneficial for the health of the eyes as well. The next question I have is, I take vitamin B complex. Is that the same as vitamin B3, and can I take both types? So, vitamin B complex is a supplement that contains a lot of different types of vitamin B. And I'm happy to be corrected if I'm wrong, but I do believe that the B3 in the complex is actually nice. It's actually a low dose of niacin. So, it is different to nicotinamide supplements. Um, and we haven't really done when we haven't done any research to look at the two together and whether it has any additional effect, but they are actually different. And so the next question I have is from Nellie. And it's like, what is the rationale behind the use of nicotinamide in open angle glaucoma? And how do you decide on a dose of 6 grams a day? So, Nellie, we don't actually do 6 grams a day. So, our dose that we're doing is for clinical trials, participants actually start off on 1.5 grams a day for 6 weeks. And that is because it allows the person to actually slowly adjust to taking a higher dose of nicotinamide. And after 6 weeks of taking 1.5 grams, our trial participants go up to 3 grams a day, where they actually take 1.5 grams in the morning and 1.5 grams in the evening with food. And as I mentioned earlier, this dose is based on our earlier preclinical studies from our colleagues that did show that it had a lot of benefit in preventing, in supporting nerve cell health and preventing the damage that we see in glaucoma. And that's why we wanted to go for that dose to see whether it had an effect in people. And in our first study, we definitely looked at what happened when people took the 1.5 grams for 6 weeks before they then increased it to 3 grams per day. And we only found that significant benefits after they took the 3 grams a day dose. And that's also why we have continued on with this dose for this 2-year trial. And the rationale is specifically around nicotinamide in open angle glaucoma. I hope my presentation helped answer that question a little bit, but it's all got to do with supporting the mitochondria in our cells, which are essentially the batteries for our nerve cells and give the energy for the nerve cells to help them survive. We have evidence to show that in open angle glaucoma, our mitochondria might actually be impaired. So they're not producing the energy as efficiently as possible, meaning that the nerve cells aren't getting enough energy for them to work and function properly. And so nicotinamide is all about helping support these mitochondria to produce the energy they need. And it's a little bit like adding oil to a car engine to help it run more smoothly. Whilst it doesn't actually get rid of the problem, you're actually supporting the whole network in order to improve the health of the nerve cells and then slow down vision loss. And that's the rationale behind it. And so the next question I have from Juliana is, what form of vitamin B3 is being studied and showing more promising results, and also at what dosage? So I did just mention the dosage a bit earlier, so I hope that answered your question. And so the vitamin B3 that we're studying is nicotinamide, which is also known as niacinamide. They are the same thing, but they are distinctly different to every other type that is also known as vitamin B3. Currently, there is also a clinical trial that's happening in Hong Kong that's looking at nicotinamide riboside. And so I can't comment on that because that trial is still ongoing. But all the evidence that we have around glaucoma and vitamin B3 is all around nicotinamide only. And so the next question I also have from Juliana is, has vitamin B3 shown to improve nerve damage that is already present, or is it more of a preventative measure? So in the preclinical models, so let's take a step back from the clinical trials first. In the preclinical models, it was actually it was preventative, but it also acted as a treatment as well. So it can actually help support the nerve cells in glaucoma that was existing. So what we believe in people with glaucoma, what we believe is that the nerve cells, we don't just have at the back of the eye, we don't just have a population of healthy nerve cells or dead nerve cells, right? We actually have a population of sick nerve cells as well. And that's what we're hoping to target with the nicotinamide. Healthy nerve cells are the ones that are still functioning properly despite the fact that there is glaucoma present. The dead nerve cells are the nerve cells that we've lost, and that's led to permanent vision loss in glaucoma. We believe that there's a population of sick nerve cells, and these are the ones that have potential to recover if supported properly. And so we do know that even with pressure lowering, that we can actually boost the health of nerve cells and then support function. We used to think that in glaucoma, you just lose vision and keep losing vision. But we now know that there's a lot of evidence to show that you can actually rescue nerve cells, whether it's by pressure lowering or now what we're trying to do with nicotinamide. And that's to support nerve cells so that they can function better and then regain function in that way. So it's not just about preventing. So we're not looking at preventing here in the sense that in people who don't have glaucoma and whether they convert and develop glaucoma, that's a very difficult study to do. But we're looking at, in our clinical trial, we're looking at people who do have glaucoma and whether we can slow down their vision loss. So thank you, Juliana. And the next question I have is from Andrew, which is vitamin B3 applicable for use with normal pressure glaucoma? And if so, what dosage is likely to be therapeutic? So Andrew, we are actually also investigating normal pressure glaucoma, normal tension glaucoma in this clinical trial. And part of the reason why we are actually doing a big collaboration with so many people around the world is because we actually want to target many different types of subtypes of glaucoma. So the most common subtype is open angle glaucoma, but we also have normal tension glaucoma, angle closure glaucoma, pseudoexfoliative glaucoma. There are actually many different subtypes, and even though they all end up with nerve damage and causing vision loss, they are slightly different. And the number of people that have it around the world is slightly different as well. So for example, there's more people in Sweden who have pseudoexfoliative glaucoma compared to open angle, whereas in Australia, we're 80% open angle. So the reason why we have this collaboration is to try and answer this question: how does nicotinamide work with many different types of subtypes of glaucoma as well? And normal tension glaucoma is one of those. And it's particularly interesting to us because normal tension glaucoma, as the name suggests, these people have normal eye pressures to begin with. So there are other factors at play here aside from eye pressure that is causing nerve damage. And so we are actually looking into that right now in this clinical trial. And we are looking at the same dosages that we're using across the board. So thank you, Andrew. So the next question I have is from Colin, which is, in the study, has there been any evidence of nicotinamide causing rashes on the face and neck? So Colin, that actually hasn't happened in our clinical trial. In our first study and in our current study, we haven't had any reported side effects around rashes. And it is important that if you do experience such things, it is important to go speak to your medical practitioner to see what it is that you are taking. Typically, nicotinamide doesn't cause rash. For things like flushing, for example, that's also more associated with niacin over nicotinamide. And so, if that is happening to you, do seek out some medical opinion to see what may be going on. Thanks, Colin. And so the next question I have is from Derek, is people have trouble with niacin flush. Can a non-flush formula work for glaucoma? So Derek, you are right. And I didn't see that question when I alluded to niacin flush a little bit earlier, but niacin flush in the flushing of the skin is actually really quite common in niacin. And that's because niacin is actually used throughout the human body for a whole lot of other processes that nicotinamide is not. And that's why nicotinamide doesn't have as many side effects as niacin does, simply because it's not used for as many processes in the human body. So As I mentioned earlier, niacin is actually not what we're studying for glaucoma because it actually doesn't have a huge role to play in generating energy for nerve cells in the eye. So, whilst there are available non-flush niacin options available, we actually don't have any evidence to currently support whether niacin will do anything for glaucoma, and whereas all the research is currently focused on nicotinamide. So, thank you, Derek. So I have a question from Sanseev. Will the B3 cause any issues when using current glaucoma medication? So Sanseev, this is actually to be used, the idea around nicotinamide is to be used in conjunction with current glaucoma medication. And that's because it works on a separate mechanism. So all of our current glaucoma treatments are all around lowering pressure in the eye. So whether you're using eye drops or whether it is by laser or whether it's by surgery, the aim of all of those treatments is around lowering eye pressure. And so the reason why we're looking at nicotinamide is because people can still progress and lose vision despite having low eye pressures because of treatment. And so we're looking at what else can we do for these people. Aside from eye pressure, how else can we actually support people who have glaucoma? And nicotinamide is designed to support the nerve cells directly. So whilst lowering eye pressure is very important, it's not acting on the nerve cells directly. It's indirectly acting on the nerve cells to try and support them. Whereas nicotinamide is all about, can we actually directly support these nerve cells to help give them the energy they need to work better? So the idea in the future is that if nicotinamide is going to be useful, that it will be used in conjunction with current glaucoma treatments. So then not only are we lowering eye pressure, but we're also acting on the nerve cells themselves to help boost their energy levels and try to support their health and function. And so thank you. It's a 6:31 already. I can't believe it. That happened really quickly. Thank you all for your questions. If you do have any more questions, please, you can email Glaucoma Australia, and on this email address that's appearing on your screen. You can also call Glaucoma Australia as well, and they can coordinate the response with me to answer your questions. So thank you everyone for joining tonight. It was lovely. It went by really quickly, but I hope I answered some of your questions, and thank you very much. Good night.